echoes in the mist. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. Part 1. The Inciting Incident, a Somber Reunion. The mist hung heavy over Havenwood, a perpetual shroud that softened the edges of Victorian gables and clung like damp lace to the ancient gravestones in the town cemetery. Eleanor Vance, a woman who usually navigated the sharp angles of New York City with effortless grace, felt its chill seep into her bones the moment her tires crunched on the gravel driveway of her Aunt Clara's house. Autumn had painted the landscape in fiery hues of crimson and gold, but here, in this town steeped in old money and older secrets, the air seemed thick with unspoken histories and the scent of damp, decaying leaves. She'd come for a funeral, but it felt more like a summons to a past she'd painstakingly tried to bury. Eleanor, a successful architect who designed soaring glass towers, preferred the precision of blueprints to the disquieting ambiguity of human emotions. Yet Havenwood had always been a place where emotions ran deep, like the currents beneath its rocky coastline. Her Aunt Clara, a woman of quiet strength and sharper wit, had been the last tangible link to a childhood that now felt like a dream. The old stone church, its steeple piercing the low sky, was packed. The air inside was heavy with the scent of lilies and solemn reverence. Eleanor, elegant in a charcoal suit, slipped into a back pew, drawing comfort from the anonymity. But anonymity was a luxury Havenwood rarely afforded. Her gaze, despite her best efforts to keep it fixed on the stained glass window depicting a weary fisherman, was drawn to the back of the church. He stood there, a figure carved from shadow and sorrow, a stark contrast to the subdued congregation, Julian Thorne. Even after 15 years, the curve of his shoulders, the way his dark hair fell across his brow was instantly recognizable. He seemed to absorb all the light around him, his presence a palpable weight in the hushed space. His vibrant eyes, once full of a dazzling, restless energy, were now haunted and distant, like quiet pools reflecting a perpetual twilight. Their eyes met, briefly, across the crowded pews. A jolt, sharp and unwelcome, shot through Eleanor. The years melted away, replaced by the raw ache of a shared past and the devastating tragedy that had fractured their world. The boy she had loved, the one who had made her laugh and dream, was gone, replaced by a man burdened by an unseen, crushing weight. He was still devastatingly handsome, an untamed strength in his angular features, but there was a weariness etched around his mouth that hadn't been there before. He looked away first, his jaw tightening, as if the sight of her was a fresh wound. The funeral was for Harold Sterling, a distant cousin of Julian's, a prominent figure in town, which only served to underscore the tangled, intertwined roots of Havenwood's old families. As the service concluded, Eleanor joined the slow procession, offering condolences to the grieving family. It was then she encountered Beatrice Bellweather. Beatrice, the town's formidable matriarch, loomed at the church doors like a gatekeeper to Havenwood's history. Her silver hair was coiled into an impeccable chignon. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. She clasped Eleanor's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Eleanor Vance," Beatrice stated, a pronouncement rather than a greeting. "So, you've returned. For Clara, of course. A great loss." Her gaze flickered pointedly towards Julian, who was still standing by the door, speaking with a small group of Thorne relatives. Havenwood has a way of calling its own back, doesn't it? Though some things, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a low, chilling murmur, are best left buried. The words were a curt, almost warning, welcome back. Later, at the wake held at the Sterling family's sprawling estate, Eleanor found herself cornered by a clutch of well-meaning but prying acquaintances, all eager to dissect her life in New York. She longed for escape, and it came in the form of Julian. He was refilling his glass at the bar, his back to her, when she approached. "Julian." Her voice was a fragile whisper, barely audible above the polite hum of conversation. He turned, slowly, the glass of amber liquid held tight in his hand. His gaze was guarded, a fortress around his emotions. "Eleanor," he acknowledged, his voice a low rumble, rougher than she remembered. A stilted, awkward conversation followed. They spoke of the weather, of Aunt Clara's gentle nature, of the declining fortunes of some of the old families. Everything, it seemed, but them. The air between them was thick with what remained unsaid, the ghost of Liam, Julian's younger brother, hovering in the corners of the room. 15 years since the boating accident that had claimed Liam and shattered Julian's world. Julian had been the sole survivor, pulled from the icy waters hours later, riddled with hypothermia and a guilt that had calcified into a wall between them. The weight of that day had driven him into a self-imposed exile, eventually leading to their painful breakup and Eleanor's desperate flight from Havenwood. He still blamed himself. She saw it in the tension of his jaw, the way he avoided her direct gaze. He couldn't look at her without seeing the reflection of his deepest failure, the boy he couldn't save, the family he'd lost. "I'm sorry about Liam," Eleanor finally managed, the words a dull echo of the hundreds of times she thought them. Julian flinched, as if she'd struck him. His grip on his glass tightened. "It was a long time ago, Eleanor." His voice was flat, dismissive, but the pain in his eyes screamed otherwise. Some memories are best left undisturbed. He excused himself abruptly, melting back into the shadows of the room, leaving Eleanor adrift in a sea of unspoken grief and unanswered questions. She had returned to Havenwood for a funeral, but it felt like the funeral of her own peace, resurrected by the agonizing presence of the man she had loved, and perhaps still did. Part 2. Rekindling and Whispers of the Past. Eleanor's initial plan had been a quick departure, a respectful visit, a final goodbye to Aunt Clara, and then back to the ordered predictability of her New York life. But her family, particularly her mother, had other ideas. Aunt Clara's beautiful but dilapidated historic home, a sprawling Queen Anne with sagging porches and peeling paint, needed tending. "Who better than you, darling?" her mother had coaxed over the phone. "An architect. Clara would have loved it, seeing her old house brought back to life." The task, initially an unwelcome burden, soon became a plausible anchor. It provided a reason for extended stays, a purpose that didn't involve confronting the ghost of her past every time she rounded a corner. The house, with its eccentric charm and hidden nooks, became her sanctuary, a silent confidant as she meticulously documented its structural flaws and dreamed of its future glory. Her presence in Havenwood, however, made encounters with Julian inevitable. His vineyard, Thorne's legacy, lay just outside town, nestled in a valley that caught the morning sun. It was struggling, she'd heard, an old family venture clinging to a fierce, stubborn pride. Yet it produced a robust, soulful wine, a taste that was as complex and brooding as its owner. One crisp afternoon, while scouting for antique lighting fixtures in a dusty local shop, Eleanor found herself face to face with Julian. He wasn't in his usual dark funeral attire, but worn jeans and a flannel shirt, his forearms dusted with soil. He looked more at home, more himself, amidst the earthy aroma of old wood and potting soil. Their encounters were initially marked by caution, by painful silences that stretched taut between them. They talked about the weather, the upcoming harvest, the slow decay of Havenwood, everything and nothing. But beneath the surface, The undeniable spark of their first love, dormant for so long, began to flicker. Eleanor found herself drawn to the wild beauty of his land. She'd drive past Thorne's legacy, ostensibly running errands, her eyes lingering on the neat rows of dormant vines, on the sturdy, weathered farmhouse. One afternoon, she found herself walking among the bare vines, the air crisp and quiet. Julian, emerging from the cellar, spotted her. There was no escaping that day. He offered her a tasting. In the cool, echoing quiet of his cellar, surrounded by oak barrels, they finally spoke, not just words, but fragments of their souls. He showed her the intricate process of winemaking, explaining how each season left its mark, how patience was key. Eleanor saw through his brooding exterior to the kind, passionate man she once knew, the boy who would explain constellations to her under the Havenwood sky. Julian, in turn, was captivated by Eleanor's quiet strength, her empathetic spirit that didn't pry but simply understood. He saw the resilience in her, the architect who built new structures from old foundations. Despite the growing connection, the unspoken past still hung between them, a thick fog that prevented clarity. Eleanor longed to reach out, to ask, to understand, but the memory of his dismissive coldness at the wake held her back. Beatrice Bellweather, a watchful shadow, frequently appeared on Eleanor's periphery. She'd materialize at the town market, at the antique shop, at the library. Her comments were always subtle yet pointed. "It's good to see the Vance family still takes an interest in Clara's property," she'd say, her gaze drifting to Julian if he happened to be nearby. "Havenwood depends on its old families, you know. Important to keep the peace." Beatrice would plant seeds of doubt, a casual remark about the Thorne family's proud but stubborn nature, or a cryptic piece of advice about the importance of maintaining appearances. Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that Beatrice was subtly trying to warn her away, to keep her from digging too deep. What Eleanor noticed most, though, was Beatrice's peculiar tension whenever the topic of Liam's accident was even tangentially approached, a quick change of subject, a dismissive wave of the hand. As Eleanor delved into Aunt Clara's house, she discovered treasure troves of Havenwood history. In the dusty attic, among moth-eaten tapestries and forgotten furniture, she found old boxes filled with correspondence, faded photographs, and a meticulously kept journal. Aunt Clara, that turned out, had been an amateur historian, chronicling not just family events, but also local happenings, including accounts of the Thorne and Vance families. Leafing through the delicate, yellowed pages, Eleanor began to piece together a fragmented narrative concerning Liam's accident. Aunt Clara's entries detailed the immediate aftermath, the town's shock, the swiftness of the official investigation. But there were subtle inconsistencies. The journal mentioned whispers, hushed conversations among the townsfolk about a strange urgency from town figures to close the investigation quickly. Too quick, Clara had written in one entry, for such a tragic loss. Eleanor learned that Liam had been with another prominent town youth on the boat that day, Marcus Sterling, son of a powerful local politician and businessman. Marcus had always maintained he left Liam at the dock, or that he was in another part of the boat just before the accident. His story had been accepted without much scrutiny, but as Eleanor reread Clara's careful, almost coded observations, a cold knot began to form in her stomach. There was more to Liam's death than met the eye, and the mist of Havenwood, she realized, was far thicker than mere weather. Part 3. The Climax. The Truth Unveiled. The more Eleanor read of Aunt Clara's spidery handwriting, the more a gnawing certainty took root. Liam's death wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a story with missing pieces, a carefully constructed silence. Driven by a desire for closure, not just for Julian, but for Liam's memory, and for the need to understand the enduring pain that had crippled the man she loved, Eleanor delved deeper into her aunt's archives. One rainy afternoon, the kind of day that made Havenwood feel truly melancholic, Eleanor discovered a small leather-bound album tucked beneath a pile of old newspapers in Clara's study. Inside, among snapshots of family picnics and garden parties, was a faded, innocuous-looking photograph. It showed Liam and Marcus Sterling, their youthful faces grinning, standing on a small fishing boat. Liam held up a string of freshly caught fish, while Marcus, slightly out of focus, clutched an empty liquor bottle, glinting dully in the sunlight. The date stamped on the back confirmed it, taken just hours before the accident. Marcus hadn't just been on the boat, they'd been drinking. But the most damning piece of evidence was yet to come. Tucked away in a secret compartment in Clara's antique writing desk, Eleanor found an old handwritten letter. It wasn't addressed to a confidant, but to be opened posthumously by a trusted family member. Aunt Clara's elegant script, usually so precise, trembled with urgency. The letter expressed deep unease about the accident's official report. Clara wrote of hushed meetings, of the Sterling family's immense influence, and of a deliberate cover-up to protect the Sterling boy and his family's reputation. She wrote that Marcus had been notoriously reckless, especially when drinking. Clara had seen him that day, stumbling out of the general store with the bottle. She hinted at manipulated evidence, a boat accidentally destroyed before a thorough investigation. Aunt Clara had been too afraid to speak out, knowing the power of the Sterling family and Beatrice Bellweather's pervasive influence, but her conscience had refused to let the truth die with her. Eleanor felt a cold dread, then a simmering fury. She clutched the photograph and the letter, her hands shaking. She had to tell Julian. She found him at Thorne's legacy, pruning dormant vines, his back to the weak afternoon sun. The air was crisp, the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke filling the silence. When he turned, his face was etched with the familiar weariness she had come to recognize. "Julian, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. He straightened, a wary look entering his eyes. "About what, Eleanor? The price of grapes? The encroaching mist?" He tried for lightness, but it fell flat. She laid the photograph and the letter on a weathered barrel between them. "About Liam, about what really happened." Julian's eyes narrowed, flickering from the photo to the letter, then settling on her. "What is this? What are you doing, Eleanor?" His voice was low, dangerous. "Are you trying to hurt me? To dredge up old pain for sport?" "No, I'm trying to find the truth, Julian. Look at this. This was taken the day Liam died. Marcus was there. They were drinking." He snatched the photo, his jaw clenched. "So? Liam drank too. We all did sometimes. It was an accident, Eleanor. I was there. I failed him." His voice cracked on the last words, pure agony radiating from him. "I blamed myself for 15 years. Are you trying to take even that from me, the burden of my own failure?" "It wasn't your failure," Eleanor cried, her own frustration boiling over. "It was a lie, a deliberate cover-up." She thrust Aunt Clara's letter at him. "Read it, please, Julian. Just read it." He hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he took the fragile paper. He read, his eyes scanning the elegant, damning script. As he absorbed Aunt Clara's words, a kaleidoscope of emotions crossed his face. Disbelief, then confusion, then a dawning horror. The raw grief and guilt he'd carried for years, the narrative of his own culpability, refused to let him believe anything else. This is conjecture. Aunt Clara was old, perhaps confused," he stammered, his voice losing its certainty. "Marcus, he said he left. He was friends with Liam." "Friends who let him die and then covered it up?" Eleanor challenged, her voice piercing through his denial. Julian, think. You were unconscious, concussed. You were a boy, shattered by grief. They wanted you to believe you were responsible. They manipulated you. A heated argument erupted, reopening old wounds, threatening to shatter the fragile closeness they had rebuilt. He accused her of fabricating stories, of trying to rewrite history, of needing a villain where there was only tragedy. She accused him of cowardice, of clinging to his guilt because it was easier than confronting a deeper, more brutal betrayal. Tears stung Eleanor's eyes, but she held firm. Julian, she pleaded, her voice thick, do you remember anything from that night, anything at all, beyond the official story? He closed his eyes, his breathing ragged. He remembered fragments. Marcus's boisterous laughter, the way he'd been showing off, speeding the boat along the choppy coastline. The last thing he recalled before the crash was a sudden lurch, a shout from Liam, and Marcus's panicked face. Then darkness. His own confusion, the blinding pain, the overwhelming cold. He'd been told he was delirious. He'd been told he'd fallen overboard when Liam steered too close to the rocks. Eleanor's unwavering belief in him, coupled with the undeniable evidence, the photo, the letter, slowly, excruciatingly broke through his resistance. The fortress of his guilt began to crumble, revealing a raw, profound wound. He clutched the letter, his knuckles white. Beatrice Bellweather, he whispered, his voice hoarse with dawning realization. She was always so quick to dismiss any questions about Liam, so protective of the Sterlings. They decided to confront her. Beatrice's opulent ancestral home loomed in the evening mist, a formidable testament to Havenwood's old money and deep-seated traditions. Inside, the drawing room was filled with polished antiques and the scent of expensive potpourri. Beatrice, composed as ever, sat regally in a velvet armchair, a half-finished crossword puzzle on her lap. Eleanor, Julian, I was expecting you, she said, her eyes, shrewd and knowing, fixed on the letter clutched in Julian's hand. Clara always did keep meticulous records, a blessing and a curse. Eleanor laid out the evidence, the photograph, the letter, the inconsistencies in the official account. Julian, his face pale but resolute, added his own fragmented memories, the doubts that had begun to plague him. For the first time, Beatrice Bellweather's composure cracked. Her hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as she set down her pen. The formidable matriarch, cornered by truth, finally broke. Yes, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper, yet ringing with undeniable authority. It is true, Marcus was responsible. Drunk and joyriding, as Clara suspected. He collided with the old buoy markers near the reef. Liam was thrown clear, but he struck his head. He was gone before Julian could reach him. A collective gasp seemed to echo in the silent room. Julian stood rigid, his face a mask of rage and despair. Why? Eleanor asked, her voice sharp with accusation. Why would you do that? To Julian? To Liam? Beatrice looked at them, her eyes, surprisingly, filled with a deep, weary sadness. To protect Havenwood, the Sterling family's political career, their business interests, it was all tied together. A scandal of that magnitude, involving its wealthiest families, would have torn this town apart. It would have ruined Marcus, yes, but it would have damaged so many others. There was a complicit sheriff, Marcus's father, myself. We orchestrated it. Her voice was devoid of self-pity, only a stark, brutal honesty. We subtly shifted blame, created a narrative. Julian, traumatized and grief-stricken, was the easiest to convince. He already carried the guilt of survival. We simply reinforced it. I genuinely believed I was protecting the town, its delicate social fabric, its future. The mist outside seemed to press against the windows, a silent witness to a truth that had finally, agonizingly, been unveiled. Part 4. Resolution and Redemption. The revelation shattered Julian. The immense, crushing weight of false guilt, a burden he had carried for half his life, lifted, leaving an unbearable lightness that was both liberating and terrifying. But it was immediately replaced by a profound anger, a burning fury, not just at Marcus Sterling and Beatrice, but at the injustice done to Liam and to Eleanor, who had also suffered the fallout of their calculated deception. Years of self-blame twisted into a deep sense of betrayal. Eleanor, her own emotions a turbulent mix of relief and sorrow, stood by him. Her presence was a steady anchor in the storm of his emotions, her hand finding his, a silent promise of support. She understood that while the truth had set him free from a lie, it had also opened new wounds, deeper and more complex. "We have to expose them," Julian said, his voice raw, his eyes blazing with a newfound resolve. All of them. Their first confrontation was with Marcus Sterling. Now a seemingly successful and respected figure in the community, Marcus lived in a modern, sprawling home overlooking the bay, a stark contrast to the old money estates. They met him in his impeccably designed office, the scent of fresh coffee and ambition filling the air. Marcus, initially confident and dismissive, scoffed at their accusations. "Old news, Julian. A tragic accident. We've all moved on." But as Eleanor laid out the photograph, Aunt Clara's letter, and Julian recounted his newly remembered fragments of that night, Marcus's composure began to fray. His face, usually smooth and unlined, slowly crumpled. He denied, he blustered, he tried to intimidate, but faced with the irrefutable evidence and the looming threat of public exposure, the carefully constructed facade of his life cracked. He finally broke down, confessing his cowardice, his panic, and the lifelong burden of his secret. The shame of his actions and the complicity of his father and Beatrice had twisted him into the man he was today. The truth, once a whisper, now reverberated through Havenwood like a thunderclap. It shook the town's foundations, ripping through the carefully woven tapestry of old families and unspoken alliances. The Sterling family faced public scrutiny, legal challenges, and the rapid unraveling of their political and business empire. Marcus, stripped of his reputation, retreated into disgrace. Beatrice Bellweather, her authority and prestige irrevocably shattered, offered a public apology, not in the newspaper, but in a tense, televised town hall meeting. Her confession, delivered with a chilling formality, detailed the depth of the cover-up and her misguided motives to protect Havenwood. She accepted the consequences of her actions, her once sharp eyes now clouded with resignation. While not fully pardoned, her honesty, however belated, allowed a path for the town to begin its own painful process of healing. Julian, finally free from his self-imposed prison of guilt, began to truly heal. The anger slowly subsided, replaced by a profound sense of peace and clarity. He forgave himself, not just for Liam's death, but for the years he'd wasted in shadow. He found a new purpose in honoring Liam's memory, transforming his grief into action. He became a vocal advocate for justice, not just for his brother, but for others similarly wronged by the powerful and privileged. Thorne's legacy, once a symbol of his isolation, became a testament to resilience, its robust wines now carrying a deeper story. He and Eleanor, their love forged anew in the crucible of truth and shared pain, decided to stay in Havenwood. The town, for all its flaws, was home, and it was here that their future lay. Eleanor took on the restoration of Aunt Clara's home with renewed passion. She envisioned it not just as a beautiful house, but as a center for community engagement, a place where Havenwood's history could be acknowledged and celebrated, blending old stories with new beginnings. She meticulously preserved its architectural integrity while infusing it with modern functionality, a metaphor for their own lives. Together, they confronted the lingering societal expectations of old Havenwood, choosing authenticity over appearance, truth over convenience. They became a symbol of the town's slow, painful, but ultimately hopeful transformation. The story ends with Eleanor and Julian, hand in hand, walking along the windswept Havenwood coastline. The mist, once a heavy veil of secrets, now felt less like a shroud and more like a gentle, cleansing embrace, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. Their footsteps crunched on the pebbled shore as the waves rhythmically pulled back, revealing long-hidden treasures and washing away the debris of the past. Their love, once a casualty of devastating lies, had not only endured, but had grown stronger, more profound, deepened by shared pain and triumphant truth. They had found not just love, but a home and a future built on honesty, forgiveness, and the enduring power of their shared history. Havenwood, too, was slowly learning that some echoes, when finally allowed to resound, are not of pain, but of a quiet, hard-won hope.